defendant do after yanking the hiking stick out of her daughter's hand?
Well, she just kind of lifted it up and then jabbed at her daughter. Thankfully, the little girl jumped out of the way.
Mr. Deuce, around what time did you see the defendant jab at her daughter?
That would have been right around 3:30.
I can take that back from you. You can go sit down, Mr. Deuce.
All right, what do you want?
Did you ever see the defendant and her daughter again?
Well, I got a little bit lost after that. I was looking for this lake, and I ended up walking through some trees, but about an hour later, I managed to find my way right back there.
What were the defendant and her daughter doing at the edge of this cliff this time?
Well, they were still arguing up a storm. It was a lot louder this time. It looked like the little girl had managed to get a walking stick back, and it was, you know, she was crushing it to her chest, and I really didn't want to be too involved, so I just wanted to walk right on by.
Did the defendant do anything at this time?
Well, I was really just trying to get out of the way, but I looked back one more time, you know, curiosity, and I just saw her reaching towards her daughter like she was trying to grab the hiking stick again.
Objection, speculation.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce is just testifying to his rationally based perception. He's not going into the mindset of the defendant in any way. He's just talking about what he observed and he saw at the edge of this overlook.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Going into the mindset of the defendant is exactly what Mr. Deuce just did. He said she was reaching out to grab the hiking staff. He can testify that she extended her arm and that Parker had the hiking staff, but not what that reach was for.
Your Honor.
It's a distinction that I think merits consideration. Sustained.
Permission to strike the testimony?
Yes, it'll be stricken.
Mr. Deuce, what did it look like the defendant was doing?
Well, she just kind of lunged at her daughter with one arm extended right towards her chest where the little girl was holding the hiking stick.
Did you ever see them again after that?
No, I kept on walking by. But a few minutes later, I did hear the little girl start to scream.
After you saw
Objection, speculation.
As to what?
As to hearing the little girl scream, Mr. Deuce just testified that he was walking away and he didn't ever see them again. There's no way that he could know it was the little girl screaming. He can testify he heard a scream, perhaps where the girl was, but we don't know for certain it was the little girl screaming, especially after he's testified that he was not there and that he never saw them again. This is speculation.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce can identify after speaking and hearing this girl multiple times as to what her voice sounds like, especially while she is screaming. And for that reason, it's not speculation. It is based entirely on Mr. Deuce's rationally based perception.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Hearing someone speak is very different than hearing someone scream. He never heard her scream before. And how someone talks can be very different than how someone reacts in a time of distress. Therefore, it would be speculation for him to assume that this voice was, in fact, screaming coming from Parker.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce can identify if this voice was Parker Page's voice, if I may proffer.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce will go on to further testify that he actually continues to hear Parker's voice and her say specific phrases, and he can recognize her voice because she said those words as well.
The objection is overruled.
Mr. Deuce, after you saw the defendant and her daughter fight, what did you hear Parker scream?
I just heard her screaming stuff like, I wish you'd never gotten out of prison, you don't really love me, I hate you, and then things got real quiet for a second.
Did you hear anything else after Parker said she hated the defendant?
I just heard this real high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. It sounded more like an animal dying, but I could tell it was the same voice I just heard.
Around what time did you hear that scream, Mr. Deuce?
Sometime before 4:45, I think.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Fox?
Yes, Your Honor. May I deconstruct the demonstrative?
Yes.
No, okay, no problem. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Deuce.
Good morning.
I have a few questions about some things you spoke on direct examination, if you don't mind.
Oh, well, of course.
I want to start off.
Excuse me.
You mentioned that you make videos online, right?
I do, yeah.
You want those videos to be popular, don't you?
I make them mostly for my grandkids, but yeah, if people like them and they watch them, I'm happy.
How many views your videos get, that matters to you, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Under Rule 401, this testimony is irrelevant. It doesn't make any fact, in this case, more or less likely.
How is this relevant?
Your Honor, I'm going to show that the witness has a stake in making the events of today more and more interesting, perhaps exaggerating, as it refers to his career making videos about the perception of his events.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
How Mr. Dews runs his YouTube channel has no bearing on what he witnessed at Calkins Campground on July 14th. And for that reason, under Rule 401, this testimony does not make any fact in this case more or less likely.
May I be heard?
Yes.
One of the first questions he was asked on direct examination is why he was there. He said it was in part to make YouTube videos. Therefore, his perception of events to make videos is important. If he has a tendency to exaggerate, that affects every fact that he brought out today.
So you're suggesting it goes to his credibility as a witness?
Yes, Your Honor, and bias is always relevant.
Objections overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Back to my question, how many views you get, that matters to you, right?
I guess so, yeah.
And more entertaining content gets more views, right?
I would assume so, yeah, I think so.
So you'd agree that exaggerating is good for your business.
I mean, I guess so, an extra 30 cents a month if I, play the algorithms right is nice.
So that's a yes, exaggerating is good for business.
It can be, yeah, for sure.
Mr. Dews, you have trouble remembering names too, don't you?
Sometimes, but not over much, not particularly.
So that's a yes, you have trouble remembering names.
On occasion, but, I remember all the names today.
But on July 14th, you took notes, didn't you?
Yeah, I took some notes.
Notes to help you remember those names.
Yeah, stuff like that, things I'd seen, it was kind of just a random stream of consciousness stuff. I like what they call bullet journal is what I like to do. It helps me keep everything straight in the knowledge.
That's right, you bullet journaled to keep track of everything that had happened, right?
To me, yeah. I'm not very good at it yet. It's more confusing than helpful most of the time, but I do my best.
That's right, you'd agree your notes are disorganized from that day.
Yeah,
They were jumbled,
yeah.
and they were your main recollection of what happened.
I wouldn't agree with that. It was my main, that's the only thing I wrote down. I didn't end up actually taking any videos of the day, so that was my own recorded recollection.
And you don't have those notes today, do you?
No.
Now I'd like to move on to your interactions with a group of people you didn't mention on direct examination. You talked with the police, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
And the police never asked you how you got onto the campground, did they?
No, they had me write a statement, and I included that, and is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about your interactions with the police at Calkins Campground. They didn't ask you then, did they?
No, they asked me afterwards to write a statement about what I'd seen, how I got on, that sort of stuff.
In fact, you had got on without ever checking in, right?
I checked in later that day when I was renting a campsite, but when I first started hiking, no, I didn't check in.
That's right. So you got to the campsite and didn't check in immediately.
No, I was planning on going hiking. When I went to the campsites, I checked in, of course.
You started hiking before you'd ever checked in, yes or no?
Yeah, of course.
So you were on the campsite's property for hours before you checked in, right?
I guess so, yeah.
And the police never asked you about that at the campsite, did they?
No, like I said, they had me write a statement, which I wrote that in.
But you did overhear the police say some things at that campground, didn't you?
Yeah, they were asking me for help to find the little girl, so I actually helped them find her.
Before you helped them, you heard them saying things to each other, right?
Probably, I'm sure I did, yeah.
I'll refresh your memory. You heard the police officers say to each other, Jordan Ryder should have never been out of prison.
Objection, Your Honor. Under Rule 801, opposing counsel is using these statements for the truth of the matter asserted. Jordan Ryder should have never gotten out of prison is a statement of belief. It is the defense's contention today that the police officers ran a biased investigation, and the only way they're able to prove that is to show the belief of the police officers at that time. And for that reason, these statements are being used for the truth of the matter asserted.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, the truth of these statements is that Jordan Ryder should never have gotten out of prison. As the defense, this is not our contention. In fact, they're going to show exactly what opposing counsel wanted. Bias, and bias is not the truth of the matter asserted in this instance, therefore these statements are not hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
Jordan Ryder should have never gotten out of prison. That statement is a statement of belief. Now, the only way that opposing counsel can prove the bias, the alleged bias of the police department is by having these statements being offered for the truth. And for that reason, they are inadmissible under Rule 801.
Your objection is overruled.
Back to my question. You heard the police officers talking to each other, right?
Yeah, this was after we found the body. You're not talking about before, right?
Well, this was the day of the investigation, right?
Yeah, later in the evening.
Just one day after you later learned Parker had died, right?
No, this was the same day. This was the 15th.
And on the 15th, well, you heard the police officers talking to each other, right?
Yeah, I think they were police. They were with everyone when we found the little girl's body.
You heard one say to the other, "I can't believe Jordan Ryder did this."
Objection, Your Honor. Again, under Rule 801, this testimony is hearsay.
This one I would say is different than the last because this is, I can't believe Jordan Ryder did this. Are you not offering that to prove the truth?
No, Your Honor. In this instance, we believe the opposite, actually, that the police officer did believe Jordan Ryder could do this.
So isn't that hearsay?
No, Your Honor. The truth of this matter would be that the police officer cannot believe Jordan Ryder did this. Instead, it's going to show bias on the police officer's part.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
These statements are being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. The only way that the defense counsel, again, can prove the alleged state bias is by having these statements believed to be true on part of the police officers. They are offering these for the truth. They're trying to get off on a technicality that the police officers said can't. But the jury is smart enough to understand that these statements are being used for the truth of the matter asserted. And for that reason, it is hearsay and inadmissible in court today.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Again, opposing counsel is saying repeatedly that these go to show the bias of the police. That very fact is what makes these statements not hearsay. The rule against hearsay isn't to prevent statements like these from getting in, it's to prevent unverified facts coming from the police officers. If the police officer had said, we've started to investigate where Parker's body is, that would be a fact we're bringing in, and the rule against hearsay is intended to prevent us from eliciting that fact without bringing the police officer in to testify to himself. Instead, this is going to show bias on the police officer's part, not a fact that we're not aware of.
Response, Your Honor.
Not necessary. Your objection is overruled.
Mr. Dews, you heard the police officers say to each other, "I can't believe Jordan Ryder did this."
Yeah, I think I heard something like that.
And that was only moments after you heard them say, Jordan Ryder should have never gotten out of prison.
Yeah, exactly. That was after we found the little girl's body.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Dews. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Redirect?
None, Your Honor. Just ask that Mr. Dews be allowed to step down.
Yes. Thank you.
Nice meeting you all. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. You may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. State calls Dr. Quincy to the stand. Good morning. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Reagan Quincy, and I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for Breckenridge County.
Doctor, how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I performed the autopsy on the victim, Parker Page, in today's case.
And can you tell us how you're qualified to serve our county as the Chief Medical Examiner?
Of course. So I received my Bachelor of Science degree from the Ohio State University, go Buckeyes. I received my medical degree from the University of Virginia. In 2015, I was promoted to the Chief Medical Examiner, but if you ask anyone, they'll tell you my favorite job is being a professor of anatomic and forensic pathology at Midland State University.
Thank you, Doctor. Now that we know a little bit more about you, can you start by telling us what you do as the medical examiner?
I perform autopsies to determine the time and cause of a victim's death.
And can you tell the jury what an autopsy typically entails?
Of course. An autopsy entails an internal and an external examination. In the internal examination, we look for any abnormalities in the organs of the lungs,